The morning air in Vancouver smelled of rain-soaked cedar and diesel from the early buses, the kind of cold that settled into your bones before you even had time to notice it was there. Nolan Kessler sat alone at a corner table in Hotwells, the sort of restaurant where the menus had no prices, and the staff called you by name whether you'd been there once or 100 times. He had been there closer to 100. The reservation was always under his name, the table always the same. Tucked away from the window, far enough from other diners that no one would try to make conversation. He had specific preferences about solitude. He had learned to protect them the way other men protected their money. He was 53 years old, the founder of a mid-sized construction firm that had quietly built half the residential towers along False Creek. His suits were good without being flashy. His watch was expensive but understated. He ate alone every Wednesday evening, had done so for 11 years, ever since Claire had taken the boys to her mother's place in Kelowna and not come back. Not because he was lonely. He had stopped being surprised by loneliness, but because Wednesday had always been his favorite night, and he refused to let it become something to dread. He was working through the last of his salmon when he heard the door open. He didn't look up. The Metro Gerald would handle it. That was what Gerald was for. But then Gerald's voice dropped to a murmur near the entrance, the kind of murmur that meant something unexpected, and Nolan found himself glancing over despite himself. She was small, maybe 10, maybe 11, the kind of thin that wasn't just genetics, the kind that came from real scarcity. She had a raincoat that was 3 sizes too large, the sleeves rolled up past the elbow and still hanging over her hands. Her dark hair was damp and plastered to her cheeks. She was holding the door open with her shoulder, and in her arms she carried a toddler, a boy, maybe 2 years old, wrapped in a yellow fleece blanket that had seen better years. The boy was asleep, his head heavy against her collarbone. She was speaking to Gerald in a low, careful voice. Nolan couldn't hear the words, but he could see her face. The way she was working very hard to look older than she was, to look like someone who had every right to be standing there. Gerald, to his credit, didn't immediately turn her away. He leaned down slightly to hear her better, and then Nolan heard her. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying just far enough in the quiet of the restaurant, "I noticed you hadn't finished your plate yet. When you're done, would it be all right if we had what's left?" The table beside Nolan went silent. A woman in a cream blazer looked up from her wine. Gerald straightened. He glanced back into the restaurant with the practiced expression of a man about to solve a problem discreetly. Something about it, the practiced expression, or the way the girl's chin lifted very slightly as she waited, braced for the answer she expected, made Nolan set down his fork. "Gerald," he said. Gerald turned. "Bring them to my table." Her name was Blythe. She told him this the way children tell adults their names when they're trying to seem composed. Quick, clear, no surname offered, her eyes moving around the restaurant in small, careful glances before settling back on him. "And who's this?" Nolan asked, nodding toward the toddler, who had woken up and was now sitting in the chair beside Blythe, with the blanket still tucked around him, regarding Nolan with the solemn, unbothered expression of someone too young to know he should be wary. "That's Pip," she said. "His real name is Philip, but he doesn't answer to Philip." "I never answered to Nolan when I was his age," Nolan said. "I only answered to trouble." She looked at him for a moment, as if weighing whether that was true. Then, very briefly, the corner of her mouth moved. Gerald had brought 2 additional settings without being asked. He had also, Nolan noticed, brought a small plate of bread and butter and set it wordlessly in front of Pip, who accepted this as his natural due and began eating with both hands. "Are you hungry?" Nolan asked Blythe. "I'm fine," she said. It was the kind of answer that meant the opposite. He'd been married long enough to know that, and long enough divorced to know better than to push. He called Gerald back and ordered 2 more meals. He made it sound incidental, and whatever else they have tonight, actually, let's get a look at the menu, so that Blythe wouldn't feel like a charity case receiving a charity plate. She watched him do this, and he could tell, from the slight loosening around her eyes, that she understood exactly what he was doing. She was a perceptive child. It both impressed him and hurt him a little, the way perceptiveness in children so often did. It wasn't a skill they learned in good circumstances. They ate mostly in silence for a while, the comfortable kind, or as comfortable as silence could be with Pip narrating his food choices at increasing volume. When the meals came, Blythe ate with the contained, deliberate pace of someone who had learned not to show hunger. But she ate everything. "Where do you live?" Nolan asked eventually. A pause. "East Van," she said. "With my gran. Does your gran know where you are tonight?" Another pause, longer. "She's been having a rough time. She doesn't always. She forgets things." She said this with the careful neutrality of someone who had worked out how to explain an adult problem in a way that didn't invite too many follow-up questions. I didn't want to wake her. Pip was hungry, and I knew if I walked down to Hastings there'd be. She stopped. Anyway, Nolan looked at her across the table. She looked back at him steadily, waiting to see which kind of adult he was going to turn out to be, the kind who filed a report, or the kind who made a scene, or some other kind she hadn't encountered yet. "How long has it been like this?" he asked. "A while," she said. He nodded. He didn't push further. But when Gerald came to clear the plates, Nolan asked him, quietly, to bring a takeaway bag, as much as the kitchen could send, whatever was going at the end of service. Blythe saw him do that too. This time, she didn't pretend she hadn't. He drove them home. She didn't want to accept the offer. He could see the hesitation, the quick mental calculation of whether this was safe, whether she'd read him right. He appreciated that hesitation. It was healthy. He waited without pushing, and eventually, she said, quietly, "Okay, but I want to see your license plate first." He showed it to her. She took out a pencil stub from her coat pocket and wrote the number on the inside of her wrist. He drove them home and didn't say anything about the pencil stub or the wrist or the fact that she watched the street signs the whole way with the careful attention of someone memorizing a route back. The address was a narrow house on a side street off Commercial Drive, the kind of place that had probably been cheerful once. The porch light was burned out. There were cracks in the front steps that had been filled neatly with some kind of gray foam sealant. Someone had tried recently to keep things from getting worse. He helped her carry the takeaway bags to the door. Through the window beside the front door, he could see a light on in the kitchen, the faint blue flicker of a television left on in another room. "Thank you," Blythe said. She had Pip on her hip again, the blanket trailing. She was standing very straight. "You did something brave tonight," Nolan told her. She looked at him seriously. "I just asked for leftovers." "People are afraid to ask for things they need," he said. "Most adults can't manage it. You walked in there and asked clearly and without apologizing for it. That's not nothing, Blythe." She considered this. Pip reached up and patted her cheek absently as if agreeing. "I'll probably never see you again," she said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. "Probably not," he agreed. She nodded once. "Thank you for the food and for the drive." A beat, and for not making it weird. He laughed, genuinely, the kind of laugh that surprised him, because he hadn't felt one coming. "You're welcome," he said, "all 3 counts." He drove home through the rain, and he didn't think about her again until the middle of the night, when he woke up and thought about the foam sealant in the porch steps, the pencil stub in her coat pocket, the way she'd written his license plate on her wrist. He thought about it for a long time. It took him 4 days to find out who she was. He wasn't proud of how he did it. He knew people, the way a man of his business knows people, and he made some calls that he told himself were purely informational. A social worker acquaintance, a contact at the city, a woman named Frances, who worked with an outreach organization on the downtown east side and owed him a favor from when he'd donated the materials for their new shelter roof 3 years ago. Frances called him back the next morning. The grandmother's name was Lorraine. She was 71, diabetic, and in the early stages of vascular dementia that had not yet been formally diagnosed because Blythe had not been able to get her to a doctor. There was no one else. Blythe's mother had been gone for 2 years. Frances didn't say how or where, and Nolan didn't ask. Pip was not Blythe's brother. He was the son of a neighbor who had asked Blythe 8 months ago to watch him for a few days, and then had stopped returning calls. The neighbor's name was on a lease 2 streets over, but no one had seen her since November. Blythe was 11 years old and had not missed a day of school. Nolan sat in his office for a while after that call and looked out the window at the North Shore Mountains and tried to remember what he had been doing when he was 11. Baseball, he thought. He had been playing baseball and complaining about having to practice piano. He called Frances back and asked what Lorraine needed most. The first time he showed up at the house on Commercial Drive with a bag of groceries, Blythe opened the door and stared at him with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite suspicion, but something in between. "How did you find my address?" she asked. "You told me the street," he said. It was not the complete truth, but it was part of it. She looked at the grocery bag. She looked at him. She stepped aside and let him in. The inside of the house was small and overcrowded with the particular density of a life lived frugally. Furniture that had come from different decades and different places. A bookshelf packed past capacity. A kitchen where every surface had a purpose. It was clean. That surprised him, or maybe it didn't, really. He was learning not to underestimate her. Lorraine was in the sitting room. She was a small woman with silver hair and the careful, deliberate way of moving that came from not wanting to seem like she was struggling. She looked at Nolan with the alert, measuring expression of someone whose mind was not as reliable as it used to be, but who had spent 71 years developing excellent instincts. "Who's this?" she asked Blythe. "He bought us dinner the other night," Blythe said. "He brought groceries." Lorraine looked at the bag. She looked at Nolan. "Are you one of those people who want something in return?" "No," he said. "That's what they all say." "Gran," Blythe said. "I'm just asking," Lorraine said unapologetically. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Well, I suppose you'd better sit down." He sat down. Pip appeared from the kitchen with a wooden spoon and immediately began using it to investigate Nolan's shoes. It was the most comfortable Nolan had felt in a room in a long time. He came back. He wasn't entirely sure. Afterward, when it stopped being something he'd made a decision about and started being simply something he did. The groceries became regular. He arranged for a home care worker, a woman named Adeze, gentle and unhurried, to come 3 mornings a week to help Lorraine. He found a pediatrician who took Pip's situation seriously and quietly, without fuss, helped navigate the paperwork that needed navigating. He made calls he knew how to make, opened doors he had keys to. Blythe watched all of this with the careful attention she applied to everything. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him one afternoon. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and he had come by to help Lorraine get to a doctor's appointment. He was making tea. He had learned where the cups were. "Because it needs doing," he said. "That's not a real answer." He thought about it. He set a cup in front of her. She had started accepting tea without argument, which he considered progress. "When I was building up my business," he said, "I had a run of a few years where things were very hard. I had people who helped me through it. I don't mean financially, I mean they showed up. They paid attention. I think about those people a lot." He sat down across from her. "I think you're going to be someone people remember like that. I'd like to help that happen." She looked at him for a long moment. She was quiet in the particular way that meant she was taking something seriously. "My teacher says I should apply for the academic bursary at Grandview Academy," she said. It was the first time she had mentioned it. "For secondary school, what do you think?" "I think I probably don't have the kind of application they're looking for," she said, and her voice was so carefully neutral that he understood immediately what she was really saying. I'm not good enough, but I don't know how to be good enough in the way they're asking for." "Would you let me look at the application with you?" he asked. She pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from her textbook and slid it across the table. The opposition, when it arrived, came in the form of a woman named Sylvie Crane. Nolan had known Sylvie for 15 years in the way you know people in a certain industry in a certain city, well enough to recognize, not well enough to trust. She was on the board of a charitable foundation he supported, which meant they were occasionally in the same rooms for the same dinners, and which had given her, he now realized, a particular set of assumptions about how he spent his money and his attention. She called him one morning in March. "I've been hearing things," she said, without preamble, "about you and a situation in East Van. I want to make sure you know what you're getting into." "I know exactly what I'm getting into," he said. "Nolan." Her voice shifted into something that she probably imagined was concern. "A child, an elderly woman with cognitive decline, a toddler in unclear legal circumstances. This is not a casual involvement, this is a liability. People are going to ask questions about your motivations." He was quiet for a moment. "People can ask," he said. "I'm not talking about people in general. I'm talking about the company. I'm talking about the board." A pause, carefully calculated. "I'm talking about optics, Sylvie," he said. "I appreciate the call. Don't make another one like it." He hung up. He told Blythe about it, not everything, but enough. He had thought carefully about whether to tell her and decided that she deserved to know because she was old enough to understand that goodness was sometimes complicated and that people sometimes complicated it further. She was quiet for a moment after he told her. "Are you worried?" she asked. "No," he said, and he found to his own mild surprise that he meant it. "She sounds like the kind of person who's never needed anything from anyone," Blythe said thoughtfully, "and thinks that means she knows more." He looked at her across the kitchen table, this 11-year-old girl who had written his license plate on her wrist and kept Pip fed and got herself to school every day for 2 years without anyone keeping track. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly right." The Grandview application was due in April. They worked on it for 6 weeks. Not every night Blythe would have found that claustrophobic, and he understood the need for space. But 2 or 3 evenings a week, sitting at Lorraine's kitchen table, while Adaze watched Pip in the other room, and Lorraine dozed in her chair and the house made its settling sounds around them. He helped her structure the essay section. He did not write it for her. He would not have known how, even if he'd wanted to. What she wrote was entirely her own, the kind of prose that came from someone who had been reading seriously since she was very young because reading had been free. She wrote about being responsible for people she loved. She wrote about what it felt like to look at a problem and not be able to fix it, and to do the next small thing anyway. She wrote one sentence that he read 3 times because he couldn't stop. "I have learned that asking for what you need is not the same as being weak. It is the bravest thing most people never do." He did not tell her he had read it 3 times. He said, "This is very strong," and meant it in a way that she seemed to understand. The application went in on a Thursday in April, in an envelope that Blythe sealed herself and carried to the mailbox on the corner. Sylvie Crane did not call again. She did, however, send an email to 3 members of the company board, suggesting that Nolan's personal entanglements warranted a quiet conversation at the next governance meeting. The email was forwarded to him by a board member named Roland, who had worked with Nolan for 20 years and had 2 sentences of commentary. "Thought you should know. I'll be voting against anything that comes from this," Nolan wrote back. "Thank you, Roland." He didn't think much more about Sylvie Crane. He found that he had less patience these days for the kind of concern that was really about control, and less ability to pretend otherwise. What he thought about instead was the morning in early May, when he arrived at the house on Commercial Drive and found Blythe sitting on the repaired front porch. Someone had finally fixed the steps properly. He'd arranged for a crew to come by, with an open letter on her lap and an expression on her face that he'd never seen before. It was the expression of someone who had spent a long time expecting to be told no, encountering a yes. She looked up when she heard his car. "I got in," she said. Her voice was very controlled, full bursary. He stood on the bottom step. He didn't say anything for a moment, because there was a tightness in his chest that he hadn't expected, and he needed a second. "Of course you did," he said finally. She stood up. She was still holding the letter. "I want to say something, and I don't want you to make it into a big thing." "All right. You didn't do this for me," she said carefully. "I did this, but I couldn't have done it. I mean, I don't think I would have even tried if you hadn't." She stopped, looked at the letter, looked back at him. "If you hadn't shown up. That's true for everyone who ever accomplished anything," he said. "I know," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I know." Pip appeared in the doorway behind her with a wooden spoon, a different one this time, larger, and looked at Nolan with the solemn dignity of a 2-year-old who has witnessed something important. There were practical things to figure out, and they figured them out. Adaze agreed to extend her hours. A family law clinic helped clarify Pip's situation. The neighbor was eventually located, and the process that followed was long and imperfect, and ultimately resulted in a temporary guardianship arrangement that Lorraine held on paper and Blythe understood in practice. Francis from the outreach organization connected them with a community health nurse who visited twice a month. Nolan updated his will. He did this quietly, without announcement, adjusting certain provisions and adding new ones. His lawyer raised an eyebrow. Nolan said, "I've thought about it carefully." His lawyer nodded and didn't ask further questions. This was why Nolan had kept him for 20 years. The company governance meeting came and went. The board voted 7-1. Sylvie Crane casting the single opposing ballot. to table the agenda item without discussion. Roland sent another 2-word email, as expected. Nolan replied with the same. On the last Sunday in June, Lorraine had a good day, a genuinely good day, the kind that had become rarer, where she was sharp and present in herself. She insisted on making dinner, which meant a full pot of beef stew and a pan of biscuits that she assembled from memory, narrating every step to Blythe in the way she had apparently always done, going back to when Blythe was very small. They ate at the kitchen table, the 5 of them, Lorraine and Blythe and Pip and a Daisy and Nolan, with the windows open to the summer evening and the smell of rain still on the air. Pip sat in a booster seat and ate stew with enormous concentration. Adaze told a story about her first winter in Vancouver that made Lorraine laugh so hard she had to put down her fork. Nolan sat at the end of the table and looked around the room. He thought about the restaurant, the quiet corner table, the 11 years of Wednesday evenings that had been. He now understood a kind of waiting, though he hadn't known what he was waiting for. He thought about a small girl in an oversized raincoat, standing in a doorway, asking clearly and without apology for what she needed. "This is good stew, Lorraine," he said. "I know it is," she said. "I've been making it for 50 years. "I don't need you to tell me," Gran Blythe said. "I'm just saying," Lorraine said, but she was smiling. Blythe caught Nolan's eye across the table. There was a brightness there that she was trying to keep contained, the way she kept most things contained, practical, careful, not wanting to need too much. But he had learned to read the brightness anyway, to read the brightness in July. Nolu Academy sent of the mailbox in. Nolan picked it up from the mailbox on one of his visits and brought it in, without comment, setting it on the table the way you'd set down something ordinary. Blythe looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and held it in both hands, carefully, like something that might turn out to be real if she was careful enough. "I'm nervous," she said. "Good," he said. "It means it matters. What if I don't fit in?" He thought about it seriously because she would have known if he hadn't. "You'll be uncomfortable," he said, "and you'll figure out who's worth the discomfort and who isn't. And in 6 months you'll know things about yourself that you don't know yet." She turned the envelope over in her hands. "Were you nervous when you started your company?" "I was terrified," he said. "I thought I was going to fail every single day for the first 3 years. But you didn't." "I did sometimes," he said. "Failing and continuing are not mutually exclusive." She was quiet for a moment. Then she set the package down and looked at him with that direct, steady gaze she'd had since the first night, the gaze that had seen more than most adults gave her credit for. "I'm glad I asked," she said. "In the restaurant, I almost didn't." "I know," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you braced yourself before you spoke," he said. "I was watching." She nodded slowly, the way she did when she was filing something away. Outside, Pip had discovered the back garden and was applying himself to a thorough investigation of the raspberry canes. His voice came through the open window in periodic enthusiastic updates. Lorraine, settled in her chair with a cup of tea, occasionally called back responses that were partly coherent and entirely affectionate. This was a life, Nolan thought, ordinary and particular and his, not the way the company was his, or the apartment downtown, or the corner table at Hartwell's. Something harder to name and easier to lose, and therefore he understood now, worth considerably more. He got up to check on Pip and the raspberry canes. The door was open. He walked through it.